going to get eaten alive, essentially.
If the site manager says this and the project manager says that, then you are in strife.
You can't be Mr. Smithers to Mr. Burns.
Managing up, managing down, managing sideways.
Lauren, I'm no shrinking violet. If I think something is wrong, I say something.
So telling your PM no, or telling your site manager no.
I think they have one of the toughest roles in the industry, and I don't envy it to them sometimes.
So Lauren, today's question, project coordinators in construction, do we think that they deserve more respect?
Oh, I think they do. I think they have one of the toughest roles in the industry, and I don't envy it to them sometimes.
It's a tough role, and I think it's often an overlooked role in terms of asking this question, do they deserve more respect? Or I think often people forget how difficult a role it is, and it's often a thankless task. And we bring it up today because we've been immersing ourselves in that world over the last couple of months. We've been quite busy in recruiting for project coordinators, and that just led us to naturally talk to people about their challenges, and we thought it'd be a good idea to do an episode on the challenge of the function of a project coordinator, because sometimes the title is confusing, isn't it?
Yeah, and it is quite a unique role, given that it's largely on site for most people, and it's very
sometimes it is, sometimes it's not, but it's the function that's sometimes picked up by the contract administrator when the project coordinator title doesn't exist as a standalone in some of the mid to small tier businesses. But it's effectively that being piggy in the middle, being the conduit of information between the consultants, the subcontractors, the site manager, the project manager, the client. And often the people in that position have a lot of accountability and responsibility, but not often a lot of decision-making authority. And often people are at the beginning part of their career in that position, and it creates a whole heap of challenges that's often not being spoken about. So we thought we'll talk about it today. So we're going to talk about all the challenges of the project coordinator function. We're going to talk about some of the solutions or some of the best strategies that some senior people, project directors, owners, senior coordinators, project managers have recommended. Word of warning, there's no silver bullets or magic solutions to some of these problems, but there are indeed some good strategies that can make people's lives earlier that we'll discuss. But before we get to that, we need to have a word from our sponsors.
Every podcast has a sponsor.
So we do this a little bit tongue-in-cheek because the sponsor is us in terms of our day job and business-placed personnel and recruitment. We thought it's valid bringing it up here because we've been talking to people recently and they said, you guys still doing recruitment? Because we've been so busy talking about the podcast. So what we've done is explain to people what we do on our website. We've revamped our website. We still do recruitment, yes, very much so. We'd like to think we do it a little bit differently by reversing the process. So the way that we go about our recruitment process is talk when we come across really good people, understand what their goals are and what they really want in their next career move, reversing the process to find them the job that they really want rather than the one that's just available, and that works really well when you've got a bit of time up your sleeve. So if you are listening to this and you're thinking about a career move or thinking about it down the track, feel free to visit our website, placedpersonnel.com.au, and you can learn a little bit more there about how we can find you better career options by reversing the process. Getting back to the episode then today, weird title, isn't it? You found it a bit challenging when you started.
Oh, yeah. Look, it took me a really long time to get my head around what this project coordinator role was. I mean, I know what a contract administrator does. I know what a project manager does, an estimator, even moving up the chain. But this project coordinator role, it really took me a while to get my head around it. And I think it's for a number of reasons. I think it's because it means different things to different companies, but also it can mean different things to different project managers, I'm realising. So a person can do it in one way for one job, and then when they move on to the next project, it's different. So there's a bit of uncertainty.
It's a really weird role, because it's not as clearly defined as some of the other roles. We know what a project manager's accountability is and what their role is. Contract administrator, site manager, but project coordinator, depends on who you talk to. Sometimes in the bigger tiers, it's a mid to senior level role that steps into the next steps of is often senior project coordinator or project engineer, which is often the same thing, and then project manager, and often their salaries are mid to high 100s or even sometimes more. But in the smaller tier space, it's often just an interchangeable title for often a graduate or a junior contract administrator, and very often the title doesn't exist at all in a smaller builder, and it's a function that's picked up by the contract administrator. But the function still exists. It still has to be done by someone. There still has to be that interchange of information between all of these different parties. So the big challenge that we want to discuss today is that you very often have different stakeholders internally and externally that have all got their own goals and intentions, and often they are conflicting within the project, and the project coordinator is stuck in the middle. And that is particularly difficult when that coordinator is not as experienced as they like to be, or they have been given the role or title as an entry level into the industry. Because what happens then, they often have to manage up, say no, go against people that are more experienced and more senior to them. And often they have to do that, and if they don't, the outcome can be quite catastrophic. But how do you know whether you're doing the right thing or not when you haven't walked the path yet? So it's a really unique position, I think, for people to find themselves in, and one where they can often sink or swim, or have to. The learning curve can be quite steep.
Yeah, very, very, very steep. And it's unique in that if you are spending most of your time on site, yes, you report to the project manager, everybody does, but the site manager is there all the time. And so you're going to sort of get caught up in whatever it is that they're dealing with too, plus get instructions from them, from the PM. Be a lot.
I think in a scenario like that, let's talk about a particular scenario. The challenge can be most difficult when you're the project coordinator that's full-time on a particular site, working with a site manager that's more senior to yourself. So often the project coordinator reports directly to the project manager, and the site manager reports directly to the project manager. But on the site manager's boss is the boss, right? So he's the one calling the shots. So when the project manager then works across multiple projects and is not there all the time, and if your site manager and project manager don't see eye to eye, or there's an issue between the two of them, then your life can very quickly become very, very difficult.
Indeed.
Because you're trying to build relationship and rapport with both of them. If the site manager says this and the project manager says that, then you are in strife. So let's talk about a specific example. A project coordinator told us a story that happened a couple of years ago in the beginning part of his career. Worked for a fit-out business on a reasonable sized fit-out and refurbishment projects. And they got the documentation through from the consultants. And the consultants did a bit of a copy-paste job on the test for, was it a wall?
It's an operating wall.
Wall, a structural test that had to be done. And if you put it down to common sense, this test wasn't really required given the scope and scale of the project. It was more appropriate for a larger project, but it was copy and pasted across. The site manager picked up on it and said to the coordinator, don't mention it, don't go anywhere near it. don't even talk to the subcontractor. I know the subcontractors on this project. I've worked with them before. If you mention this to them, or if you tell them that this has to be done, they might even just walk off the job. Yeah. You're going to affect our program. You're going to cause a whole lot of headaches for us. Leave it. Oof. Project manager was kind of like, well, I don't care, just get it done.
Yeah.
So you can imagine a project coordinator finding themselves in that situation. Now, when you put this problem, and I have done to some of the more senior people, the first thing they'll tell you is like, well, that's the problem. That's not the project coordinator's problem, right? That's a more... how deep does the problem run? It's a problem within the team. It's a problem maybe within the company. There's a leadership issue there, because a scenario like that shouldn't really exist for a coordinator to have been caught in that situation. But it happens. Clearly it happens a lot.
Yeah, I was going to say, it seems to happen a lot, because everyone I've spoken to and sort of asked this question about feeling like the meat in the sandwich, I get that response, that laughter response of like, oh yeah, all the time. Yeah. And so if it isn't something that the site manager and the project manager can sort out between them, the project coordinator is going to have to make some kind of decision about how they're going to respond, because ultimately that decision will strangely be with them.
And I think it's very difficult, almost impossible to make that decision without someone being offended or pissed off.
Yeah.
And you often have to make a decision like that to manage up, often being the least experienced person in the team, which is very difficult. And then you've got other issues as well that sometimes is externally. And we titled this episode, and we used the term respect, because I think if we talk about respect in this regard, where everyone in construction particularly will say, respect is earned. You have to earn respect, and often it's difficult for people in the beginning part of their career to earn that respect. And when you don't have the respect, then your job is often a lot harder than it would otherwise be. And another example is a coordinator that's been chasing down subcontractors that's just not responding to them.
Yeah.
Not returning phone calls, not returning emails, and they need information to make decisions. And there's another scenario where a project manager said to me they had an issue with a coordinator on a project that was the site manager, rightly or wrongly, just sort of ignored the project coordinator. They almost treat them like a nuisance.
Yeah.
That's where a scenario where the project coordinator was a junior member of staff or a graduate, still have a job to do, but the site manager not responding as they should. And again, this is a problem that has to be dealt with by the management in the organisation. But if you're the coordinator in that position, you still need to deal with it day to day and find some strategies to cope with it.
Yeah, that's a tough one, because you want to learn from all of these people. You want to please them. They're important to your career and learning progression, but you're going to be put in positions where you're going to go against them naturally at some point in time.
Managing up, managing down, managing sideways as well as the skill that you have to learn as a project coordinator. And I think also have to become a little bit of a chameleon in terms of how you deal and communicate with people. And it's a real skill and art that needs to be developed. The other thing that's challenging is time management. And this is particularly difficult. A few people have mentioned it in the upper tiers that are in those roles that are not seen as junior members of staff, but they might be between 5 and 7 years in that senior coordinator, where they have responsibility for maybe some of the more junior people on site.
Yes.
And someone had mentioned to me they feel like there's a constant queue at their desk asking for advice and input and documents, and you feel like you have to please all these people or respond to all of them because that's your job.
Yeah.
And then when you look at your watch, it's 4:00 and you still have 4 hours of other stuff that you needed to have done. So managing that process can be quite difficult as well. So if we talk about some strategies as to how to cope with this, I think fundamentally it comes down to you developing the attitude and the confidence of having some sort of backbone to stand up to all of this, because if you don't, you're gonna have a difficult career.
You're going to get eaten alive, essentially. I spoke to a project engineer about this question, seeking out strategies from people that had been through it. And I said, what do you do in this difficult situation where you're pulled in different directions? And she says, Lauren, I'm no shrinking violet. If I think something is wrong, I say something is wrong, and that's the only way to handle it. And I thought,
yeah, look, I think you have to have that backbone. Someone else mentioned to me, you can't be like a wet leaf or a wet blanket.
You can't be Mr. Smithers to Mr. Burns.
No. You can't be. I think if you want to do this job badly, it's being a yes man or a yes woman. You can't do it to please other people. And that's difficult to do when it's your first job, or when you're at the beginning part of your career, when you in an often intimidating place like construction.
I think it is something that time and learning helps you be good at, because once you sort of understand how a construction site works and what all these tests are, for example, or how best to communicate with subbies, you can back yourself a little bit, because that's obviously what you need to do. You need to be able to go, this is what I think is right, and then follow through on that and be very clear in your communication and strong in that to whoever needs to hear it. But when you're developing your understanding, that's the challenge.
But I also think it's a great way to learn, and it comes back to some of our earlier episodes where we keep focusing and banging on about the attitude and the approach that you take. Because if you're a coordinator and you in the early part of your career, you really need to go the extra mile to find answers to the problems that you have, and go the extra mile to make sure that you understand the critical path of the project, the big picture of the project, as much as you possibly can, so that when you are presented with these conflicting demands or from people, that you can fall back on what is most important, critical for the project.
Yes.
And often I think finding that information is not as easy as it sounds, or depending on the scale and size and setup of the project. And I think often you have to go above and beyond and go do it off your own, take your own initiative to get clear on that critical path of the project and what is really important. And that's where you will also learn much faster than someone who doesn't do it.
Absolutely.
And if you've got a good project manager, a project manager that backs you, and a project manager, because ultimately, when it comes down to it, even if the project manager is wrong, they're still going to make the call, they're still going to have the accountability at the end of the day for the project. So if you've got a great PM, then I'm sure your life is a lot easier. But if you've got a PM that's not as sharp or not as good as a communicator as you'd like them to be, then it's difficult. And if you've got a PM and a site manager that are at odds with each other, then your life is far more difficult.
Absolutely. And you're going to have to very quickly learn some subtle communication skills and the balance between being like that yes man, but also having the good relationships while also saying what you think. Yeah. And learning how to do that to the two different parties, learning how to keep them on side, but also tell them what you think is right and true. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think if you fall back on what is the right thing to do for the project each time you are faced with a difficult situation, and if you can explain managing up to telling your PM no, or telling your site manager no, and being able to back up and explain why that is in a way that makes sense, or ask the right questions to sort of shine a light on the spotlight on the problem. Yeah. If you give an opinion, that being an educated opinion because you know what you're talking about, because you've taken the time to understand the bigger picture of the project, well, that's where we start getting the respect.
It's true. I mean, everybody's end goal is the same. And sometimes it's about reminding people of that. And some of the project coordinators that I spoke to about what their best practice was yes, very much. If there is a problem, say for example, it's something the project manager wants done and the site manager doesn't, team up with the site manager in this particular case to say, okay, here's the problem. Here are all of the possible solutions, and present that to the project manager rather than just a no or it won't work. And again, you're talking about getting the respect. Well, if you come in with a range of solutions, with a deep understanding of the problem, of other ways of going around it, I think you're showing that you're a go-getter, you're showing that you understand, the project and all the different facets. And the big challenge, I think, for the project coordinator is doing that, balancing buildability with the commercials, because they have to do both, unlike necessarily the PM and the site manager.
Yeah, it's interesting when you start digging into some of these examples, how often it can happen where the site manager and the project manager's objectives aren't always in line. Well, they should be, but often the site manager is focused on the program, wants to get things done as efficiently and as quickly and as possible. Yeah. But then sometimes that doesn't equate to the commercial outcome that the project manager is looking for, and that can be difficult sometimes to deal with. So when it comes to then internal and external stakeholders, I think there's one of the most fundamental skills is skills in communication. And I think good project coordinators can often be like chameleons in the way that they can communicate with a particular subcontractor or subcontractors. You can't talk to your concreting contractor necessarily the same as you talk to the consultants or the engineers or whoever, and get the same outcome. And I think that's a skill that you learn through knowing how to do both verbal communication and written communication. Like often people have mentioned to me the way that you can communicate with subbies or even through email could be quite direct and quite simplistic, but then when you're communicating externally or to consultants, you have to be very detailed and make sure that everything is covered off, because often that email or correspondence will be held against you later on.
Back to haunt
so you have to be very, very methodical in the way that you communicate. And I think if you, within your teams and within the business, if you focus on the way that you communicate to get the best outcomes, you could become really good at it, in terms of knowing that the way that I talk to Jono is like, this is the way you go about it to get the best outcome. And whether that's a good thing in terms of, you can look at it from the other perspective and go, well, the PM or the senior people, they shouldn't be like that, because it's up to them as leaders of the project to behave differently to make the project coordinator's life easy, but that's just not how it works in reality.
No, and there might be very good reasons for the way that everybody is acting and everybody genuinely believing that their viewpoint is the right way through for the project. We go back to the test, the project manager thought those tests should be done because they were there and, the engineering consultant had suggested it. The site manager, who maybe understands a little bit more in terms of, that wall and the operations of it, they both feel that they're right, but very difficult. But
I think the other art of it is also bringing people together, pulling people together into a room, and you might have to play sort of devil's advocate in terms of how you bring people together to solve the problem themselves. One of the coordinators said the way he deals with it is just like he just puts his hands up in the air and go, you guys deal with it, fix it. And I thought to myself, is that the right way to do it? Because isn't that your job? So yes and no. I think there's probably time and place for it, but I think
as an end play, I can't do any more, maybe. Think about all of the things that you're learning and developing by trying to manage it yourself. I mean, when we talk about honing communication skills, organisational skills, understanding buildability. This project coordinator role is brilliant for developing the kind of leadership you'll need to be a project manager one day.
Yeah, and that's why in the bigger tiers like your multis, that's why often they are they split when the projects are so big, they split the contract administration piece completely off, the procurement and commercial management part of it, and have commercial managers, and it's the project coordinators that ultimately become project managers. So I think it's sometimes people, when they're at the start of their career, or sometimes they can be put off by the coordinator role because they think, oh, it's just a grad, but it's not. There's so much in there. There's so many. I think of those soft skills where we always bang on about that you have to learn and develop to be really good at it, to get a good outcome. And then finally, it's about managing time and managing processes. I think you are also forced to get really good at it in that job, because you have to massage a lot of situations, I think, in terms of how you communicate verbally, in person or over the phone, to people. But then you've got, sometimes the task loading can be really, really high. So you got to get really good at your admin, get really on top of your systems, get really good at following up on the emails and making sure everything is documented and as it should be. Again, I've heard stories recently of people that were trying to coordinate a lighting package, and then at the front end of the project, and no one really agreed on it, and it somehow got forgotten until at a point in time where it was really late. And it was as simple as, in the grand scheme of a project, the lighting package isn't, I think, the most difficult thing compared to a structural services package, but still they cut it so close to the line that it almost became a massive issue, because it sort of half got forgotten. Bob thought Peter was doing it and Peter thought Bob was doing it, and it wasn't that important a thing at the time until it became very important very quickly.
Yeah, it's a lot to remember.
Well, you can't remember it all. That's why coming back to organisation, systems, procedures.
Yeah, I do have PCs telling me they walk around with a notepad all the time, just writing things down. They're so worried they're going to forget something.
Yes. So, difficult role, demanding role. Coming back to that question, do they deserve more respect? I think that as an individual, you have to earn your respect.
I think they deserve perhaps a bit more understanding of the challenges of it and some of the complexities of communication. But yeah, to earn respect, you've got to develop that backbone and develop that willingness to follow the critical path, even if it means disappointing someone.
And I think that developing that backbone and that communication, there's a subtlety to it, because if you go in too hard, if you just go in too black and white, then you're also going to get the opposite response. Or if you go too Ron Burgundy on it, and you go, I'm a big deal, and I'm, or if you're incredibly blunt about it, depending on the environment you find yourself in, you need to build relationships. So you need to be careful to be able to communicate effectively, building relationships without overstepping the line, and you will find through trial and error, I guess, where that line is with particular people and groups of people in the industry. And
I mean, we know builders who, when they're looking at project coordinator roles, their number one ask is communication skills, more so than degree. And I know we've spoken about that before, but you can see why.
But that's really where the communication skills and the practicality of building meet, because you have to be able to be a good communicator and know what you're talking about, but you also need to very much make sense on what needs to happen on site and the practicalities of construction. So I think building those two skill sets in parallel with each other, knowing your stuff on site, knowing the logistics of the site, knowing the project inside out, is what you need to focus on whilst building that soft skills and communication. If you put the two together, you'll make your life easier. And if you can find a team that is works in harmony together, where there's no problem between the site manager and the PM having a discussion to solve a problem and finding a solution without you feeling like you sort of having to play like psychologist in the middle, like therapist. Then life's easier.
And we do hear good news stories like that too.
Yeah, for the most part, I think if I think about all the people I spoke with in the last couple of months, most people feel supported in their teams. Most people feel like they can fix problems. So I don't want this episode to be like this is a big problem in the industry and no one wants to work together. We're highlighting where there are some issues out there and people do experience them and how to deal with them. For the most part, people feel like they're working in good teams. But if you don't, then you've got to be able to deal with the issues. So I think coming back to the initial question, I think as an individual you need to earn respect, but I think as a discipline and as a function of a project, I think it's a good reminder for PMs and everyone just to remember it's a tough gig and to cut people some slack.
Absolutely.
Thanks for listening.